everyone, it's Michelle from Scrap Secrets, and welcome to card number 11 for the Countdown to Christmas card series. Today we are going to actually be making 4 cards, but I'm only going to count it as 1, and we are going to be using Pigment and Versamark ink in backgrounds. So these are the 4 cards we're going to make. For the first 2, I'm going to be using some MFT Sweet Tooth pigment ink with an ink blending tool, and that's just the ink foam. These are the Tim Holtz ink blending tools. I'm going to be dipping the dauber into the ink and just inking the background up. The stencil that's there right now is a Kindred Stamps peppermint swirl stencil, and then the stencil that you see to the right is the Christmas tree stencil. I have pieces of craft cardstock that are cut down to 4 by 5 1/4, which is 1/4 of an inch smaller than the card bases that we're going to put them on, and there's going to be all different card bases. So now I'm going to let the peppermint stencil background dry while we ink up the Christmas tree. Now for these 2, I've actually done this technique before, but I didn't do it on craft this year. I did it on craft last year, and I wanted to just use these because these are new and these are a little bit different. I did words last time, and I wanted to show you guys images. So there you go. I'm inking everything up real good, just making sure that all of the little pieces get inked up, just going over it just to make sure everything got some even coverage. And then this is my favorite part, the reveal. I love the way white pigment ink looks on craft cardstock. Now you could completely stop here because these backgrounds are awesome, but we're not going to. Now we're going to ink up the 2 other pieces of craft cardstock. And these ones, this background we're going to do the tree on, I'm going to be using 3 colors of Distress Oxide. Lucky Clover, Twisted Citron, and the other color is Pine Needles. So the 2 that I have right now are Pine Needles and Lucky Clover, and then you'll see I bring in some of that Twisted Citron to just give it a little bit of a lighter color. I didn't feel like there was enough contrast between the Pine Needles and the Lucky Clover, so I think that Twisted Citron just gave it just that punch, just gave it a little bit of differentiation, and it doesn't look like I just covered the background in the same color. And you'll see in the final product that it comes out really, really well. I will end up doing the same thing with the background that we do next. So now I'm going to be using Distress inks, not Distress oxides, because I want to show you guys that you can do oxides or inks with these background techniques. So the 3 colors are Abandoned Coral, Candied Apple, and Festive Berries. Now I will use Candied Apple Distress Oxide a little later on, and I'll point that out. But for this background, we are only going to be using Distress inks. So I had actually inked up the back with one of my blending tools, my makeup brushes, and it just wasn't working really well. It was kind of scratching the paper. So that's why I switched to these blending foams. Okay, so now we're going back to the very first pigmented ink ones that we did, the craft with the white pigment ink. And all we're going to do is shift the stencil ever so slightly and then ink it up with the Distress Oxides. So we're going to be using the Lucky Clover and the Pine Needles in this one, I believe. I don't think that I used the Twisted Citron in this one. I think we just did the 2 darker colors. I wanted it to be more of a, because of the white pigment ink behind it, I kind of wanted to keep it the same tone. So I was just going back and forth between the 2 of them. And it doesn't really differentiate between the 2 colors that much. You can see a little bit of a highlight, but with the white pigment ink behind it, it really, you really can't tell the difference. So you really could just use 1 color of ink. Now you could go in and do the stars separately and the bottom, the trunk. I didn't. I just did all green and white. So there's the background. I'm going to put that to the side and let that dry. And then I had to line this up off camera. I started to do it on camera. It is so difficult because I had actually flipped it around. I would suggest leaving it taped to your front so that you don't, because this one is much more difficult than the trees to line up, and then put slightly to the side. And we're going to be using all 3 colors of Distress ink. And again, that was Abandoned Coral, Candied Apple, and Festive Berries. And just randomly putting the colors on. I used Abandoned Coral very sparingly on this background, but it comes out so cool. I really love the way this is. This is supposed to look like the peppermint treats, peppermint candies, and I just love the way, this is my favorite background out of all 4 that I did. So we're gonna put that to the side and let that dry. Now we're gonna take the craft ones that we just inked the backgrounds of, and we're gonna use some Versamark ink and just go over all of the trees with the stencil. Now I lined the stencil up. It doesn't matter, there was nothing underneath, but I just lined the stencil up where I wanted it to be and use the Versamark ink because we are going to emboss with the clear embossing powder. And you'll see why in a couple of minutes. This is called the trapped embossing resist technique. So we're gonna do it 2 different times, so you'll see. And you'll see what happens. I leave in my mistake on this one, and you'll see it in a couple minutes. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing, tape the background down, and you see I have that background. That's how the makeup brush was coming out, and I didn't love it. So I just turned the piece over. Instead of wasting it, I turned it over and then just inked it up, and that's what you guys saw. Now I am turning the blending brush this time to try to get in all the crevices because this one is a little bit more detailed, and I think this actually worked better. But I'm not sure if the mess up was because I let the Versamark ink sit for a little while and didn't do the embossing powder at the same time. I don't know exactly what it was, but I'll show you how I fix it. So going over everything, lifting it up just to see what I could, just make sure I could see everything. Now I'm taking, it's called Stamp and Stuff from Stampendous embossing powder in clear. Going to go over the images, and you can see that whole part on the right, I either didn't ink it up really well or that embossing or the Versamark ink dried and that powder is not sticking to it. Don't worry, we fix it. Put that to the side, and now I'm going to do the embossing powder on the white piece, and this one is completely covered. So there's really no areas where it was hard to hold something because I felt like I was taking powder off no matter where I held it. So I just kind of tried to hold it underneath my hand the best that I could. And the stencil might have moved a little bit, or there might have been some static on there, but it turns out fine in the end. So now you can see that I'm using my heat tool. I actually had that pokey tool in my hand, or the craft knife in my hand. I was gonna hold the paper down, but you can see the difference between the stuff on the top left and the bottom right, how you can tell when the powder is heated up and you're good to go, because look at that color, you can see the clear underneath of it. So that distress ink is trapped underneath of the embossing powder, so it's always going to stay that color, and then you can put another color on top of it and you'll always have that bottom color because it's trapped under the embossing powder. So this one looks really cool. You can see this background. It's really, really pretty when it's all heated up. And you can see the difference between the melted powder and the non-melted powder. That's the entire background. Now I'm going to show you what we did to fix that. Fix the green panel. You could have left that panel there and just put something over top of it, an image. But the nice thing about this is the stencil is super easy to line up. You just line it up again and you can see through the stencil and see where you need to put that embossing or the Versamark ink, and just take the tool and ink up those parts of the tree and just do it over again. And that's exactly what I did. It doesn't hurt anything. It doesn't ruin the embossing powder that's already there. You're completely fine. It doesn't, the embossing powder, the heated embossing powder doesn't ruin your blending brush or the Versamark pad, so you're completely fine doing that. And you can see you have a better image there. You could go over it all again and do another layer of heat embossing or the embossing powder. So there you go. I'm going to do the exact same thing, shake the embossing powder on just in that section, and then we're going to heat it up, and then we're going to do a different technique. So for these last 2 backgrounds. So I'm just dumping the powder back in after I made sure everything was covered really well, and then we're going to heat it back up. can't remember if I left this in or not. I think I did. It only takes a couple of seconds. The heat gun was already hot, so I didn't really have to keep it heated up that much. And I apologize for the light, and you really can't see much of this because it's to the left. But there you go. You see the finalized piece, and it's all good. So now we're going to do the last part of the technique, and we're going to take the pigment ink and go over the entire background, because the white will get into the crevices. Now I was just wiping that red off because I didn't want the red to transfer that much onto the pigment ink. We can wipe that off, it's not a big deal. And I'm going to buff off the white where the embossing powder is. It will resist that white, but then the white will go on the areas where the embossing powder isn't. Where the embossing powder is, that red gets trapped underneath, and then the white goes on the other areas. So it made it a lot lighter. So that's one of the panels, and we're going to actually cut this out in a couple minutes because we're going to make cards out of these, as you saw. So I'm just wiping off my tool because I didn't want that red to get on top of the green. I sprayed it with a little bit of water. I took off the red. And then if you, instead of dabbing, if you pull that color down, it actually starts to come off. See right there? You really can't see the red anymore. I will get green on there, but again, you can just wipe it off. We're going to do the exact same thing that we did with the red background and color white pigment ink over it, because that green is trapped underneath. So you're actually going to, because it's Distress Oxide, you're going to just get a lighter color green. You can see the green underneath the trees is so much darker than the green of the background. I think you can see it better on here than you can on the red. The red, I think this one came out better. I like both of them, but I think this background came out better from this technique. So there was a little bit of red up there, so I just wiped it off and it turned back to the very light green. So there are the 4 backgrounds, and now we're going to make them into cards. So the first thing that I did was I took the Holly Berry dies set, and it says Season's Greetings. There's 2 different dies in there, and it took me a little while with my nails, and because that was glitter cardstock, it took a while to take that sentiment out. But once I did, I took my MFT On Point Precision Glue, put glue on the back of it, and then put that on the front of this card. And I think that white card bases look really nice with a craft cardstock layering, I don't know, what, front. What is the word I'm trying to say? Words are hard today. The card front looks nice on a white card base. That's what I was trying to say. Sorry, guys. I feel like I've been talking for a long time and my brain just left. Okay, so that we're just going to glue down all the pieces on there, and then I'm going to use my ATG to attach the card front to the card base. And again, we're going to leave the inside blank, but because I'm not sure who this is going to yet, but I think it came out really nice, and I love that there's so much white and green in there, and it just looks great. So now this is the Trapped Heat Embossed Resist, and I just cut out the die from the Ornamental die set from Concord and 9th, and then I took a piece of glitter cardstock and cut out the top, the little part that, the little topper of the ornament. And I took a piece of scrap cardstock. If you saw my Kindred Stamps swap video, you'll recognize that background paper. It was a piece of scrap paper that I had lying around, and I just loved the way that dark green looked with those color reds. And I know I wanted the ornament to be kind of on its side, so I used my ATG gun and I glued that down to the front. Again, there is no sentiment on this one because I'm really not sure who it's going to go to. So I'm waiting for that. And I mounted that on a white card base. Both of those card bases are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, a typical A2 size card. So you can just see that little bit of border, and I think it looks so nice. Those colors look so good together. I just think the topper looked a little weird. I couldn't get it to look right. Maybe it's just me. It could have been just me, and then I get nervous because it's taken me a long time. So I put it to the side, and we might fix it later. The next background, the one that is my absolute favorite, the pigment ink and then the distress ink background that we did with the peppermint one, we are going to be using the Stamping Village Holiday Seals stamp from Pink and Mean. And what this is, the Stamping Village is a cluster of stamp companies that have all worked together to create a couple of stamp sets, and they're usually for in support of some cause. I can't remember what these ones were, but these were last Christmases, and you get, I think there's 9 or 12 companies. Let me just look real quick. 12 companies in this stamp set, and everybody designed a different one. There's Concord and Ninth, Hero Arts, Gina K, Lawn Fawn, Fresh Pink Fresh Studio, Waffle Flower, Dare to Be Artsy, Art Impressions, Altenew, Avery L, Pink and Mean, and Studio Katia on there. So that one's just real cute and simple. And I chose the Pink and Mean Warm Wishes with the mug. And then this background, I just took a piece of black scrap cardstock and inked up the sentiment from MFT's Bitty Holiday Wishes. Thought it just looked real nice and simple across the front of it. Taking a piece of black scrap cardstock, inking it up with a Sweet Tooth white pigment ink from MFT, and backing that on a black card base. I just think that looks so classy. I really like the way this is like the clean and simple card, which is so not me. But then here you go, my favorite, the Trinity Gems. I'm loving these things for cards. I just pick 5 different ones, and I just different size gems and stick them all over the place. The reason that I did this is actually because I thought I centered the sentiment, and if you look at it, it's definitely not centered. I don't know what I'm thinking. I feel like everything that I do is kind of crooked. So to balance it out, it helps to have something on that right-hand side. So I'm just going to put on 5 of the gems, different sizes, and using that MFT On Point Precision Glue again, and using my craft knife to take away any of the remaining ink. So that's it for the cards today. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. I really liked doing these techniques and different backgrounds. I know this is a little bit longer than most of my videos, but I wanted to get all 4 cards in here to show you guys. So let me know what your favorite card is, what your favorite technique of the two techniques, and which one of the 4 cards was your favorite in the comments below. And thank you guys so much for watching, subscribing. If you're not a subscriber, I would love to have you. And I will see you again real soon for more videos.